Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome back to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Harvest is winding down, and now we're shifting gears and starting to think about planning our visits to the FSA office to enroll and make elections for our 2018 Farm Bill. So we've got two returning guests today on the podcast, Ben Brown and Mary Griffith. So Ben, could you introduce yourself first?
Yeah, my name is Ben Brown. I work in the Department of Agriculture Economics at Ohio State University. Work in the areas of grain marketing, commodity analysis, and farm policy.
I'm Mary Griffith. I work at the Madison County Extension Office as an Agriculture and Natural Resources Educator.
Great, guys. Thanks for joining us. So we've talked about Farm Bill a couple times, but we didn't really know what was going on. Now we're finally have the programs in place, and there's not a lot that's changed from the last time, but we do definitely have some different pricing scenarios and things like that. So why don't you guys just briefly touch on Ark County and PLC and kind of what we're looking at there, and then we'll get into a couple other topics.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to jump in here. So similar to the 2014 Farm Bill, we have the same three programs that are available to producers. You have the agriculture risk coverage option, which is both a county and an individual. So county option is based on county yields, whereas the individual option is based on individual yields on your farm. We can talk a little bit more about those later. But then we also have the price loss coverage option, which is again based on national prices. It's very similar to the last Farm Bill, and then individual yields on your farm, they're held in PLC records. In the 2014 Farm Bill, we were required to enroll for a 5-year period, one shot. If you were interested in the Ark County or the PLC program, which most people, the vast majority, 99% of farmers in Ohio and across the country were enrolled in those two programs, you could alternate commodities. So if you did Ark County for corn and soybeans, you could do PLC for wheat. And we saw that a lot in Ohio. Whereas the Ark individual coverage is for all your crops on your entire FSA farm. And so that's just something to keep in mind, that sometimes it is easier or potentially beneficial to the producer to break those out for the different commodities. But Ark individual is, because it's an individual revenue insurance policy, basically, it is for all crops on your farm, on your FSA farm. So those are our three options. Still very similar makeup and how they're designed. The agriculture risk coverage options, both at the county and to the individual level, are really designed to smooth income from higher levels of farm income down to lower levels of farm income, or to help with that transition. So back in 2014, part of the reason that made Ark County so popular was that the payments were front-end loaded, because we were moving from really high farm incomes, record high farm incomes earlier in the decade, 2012, 2013, and we were looking out and we were seeing much lower farm incomes in the years to come. And so Ark County was very popular because we were making that transition. Now that we're sitting here in 2019 and we're also faced with these programs as well, we're looking at a much flatter farm income. So a lot of counties and individuals, now there are cases, and I'll turn this over to Mary here in just a second, but there are cases where producers in Ohio might consider the agriculture risk coverage option, the Ark County option, or even the Ark individual option. But our benefit is much lower now than what it was in the previous Farm Bill, because we're at low levels of farm income right now, right? Like, it's designed to go from high to low. Yeah. The price loss coverage option is really just it's a price protection program. And so really it's to protect against disaster prices. There's a set reference price by the bill that says if market prices fall below this price, we'll make a payment. And those are based on national rates. And so a lot more easier to understand, in cases where we've got prices that are low right now, relatively low compared to what we had. PLC does offer a little bit more attractiveness, and I think that's why a lot of people thought PLC would be a preferred option going forward. But given what we just went through this summer with the weather and prevent plant and the variations in yields, Ark County and Ark individual are both showing up as a more popular option than what we thought back in March and February. So, yeah. Mary, do you have anything you want to say about?
Sure. So like Ben said, the two programs that are going to be the most popular probably are going to be Ark County versus PLC. And PLC, like Ben just said, is just a disaster price protection. So PLC payments get triggered when that market year average price, which is a national number and it's an average over the course of a year, dips below a reference price, which is a disastrous low price. So when that market year average is really low, you're going to get a PLC payment. So PLC is basically just protecting you from those super low prices, where Ark County is a function of low prices, but also of what your county yields are. So if your county had super low yields, but prices might not be as low as we need to trigger the PLC payments, the Ark County payment can still be triggered. So we know that in a lot of counties in Ohio, we had lower yields than normal. In a lot of counties, we might have actually been surprised and had some higher yields than normal. So in those counties where we had some lower yields, Ark County might be more likely to trigger a payment.
And one of the other things that really affected Ark County is kind of making it a likely, a possible option for some counties more so than what we thought, is the last couple of years we've just had really good yields in Ohio. 2018 was a great yielding year for most of our counties, and so that was propping up that historical benchmark. Basically, adding yields that are now seemingly high compared to what we had in 2019. So it's just increasing the likelihood of triggering a payment under that program.
Yeah, so if you're thinking your county might have lower yields, then 2019 might be a year to still consider Ark County especially.
Mm-hmm. And we have a decision tool actually available on our website, which is go.osu.edu/farmbill 2019. And the decision tool allows you to pick your county, pick your crop, corn, soybeans, or wheat, and kind of play with different yield scenarios and see, if I think that this is a year where we have, where we took a 10% less than average county yield, or maybe we think that the county yield was just about average. The decision tool lets you look at estimated payments for Ark County versus PLC in your county for that particular crop. The other thing that is important with this year's Farm Bill, Ben mentioned that in 2014, you were making a 5-year program election. Most people probably know by now that this year you have the flexibility to change year to year your elections. However, in 2019 and 2020, it's going to be one election that's the same for 2 years. So this time we're making an election for 2019 and for 2020. So we're looking at both of those years together.
Yeah, and I think we should mention that they have the opportunity to update their yields, and that's a landowner decision, right? So they need to be, if you're farming on rented ground, you need to be working with your landowner to make sure that happens.
Yep, this is something that is contributed to the landowner. I mean, they get to make the decision. If there's multiple landowners, they all have to agree. If they don't agree, FSA is either going to force them to go through a dispute mechanism process or not update, right? They just say not everybody can agree, so we're just going to leave it as what it is. So it is the owner's decision. Now, producers that have power of attorney for their owner can update that yield as well. Our recommendation, just out of common courtesy, would be to make sure to involve the landowner just so they understand what's going on, because it is possible that this yield, it'll stay with that farm through the remainder of this farm bill, and then any farm programs after this in the future years, if we don't get the option to update again, right? So, I mean, it is potential that this is a long-term decision. So we just think it's common courtesy, even if you do have power of attorney, to at least involve your landowner. So a lot of producers did update in the 2014 Farm Bill. We also had an opportunity to update yields in 2014. So a lot of producers did. Some did not because they were involved in the Ark County program. Of course, if you're involved in the Ark County program, your PLC yield doesn't matter to you. And so for a lot of our producers, 97% of them were in the Ark County program. They didn't feel like they needed to update their PLC yield because they weren't involved in that program. Those that did update in 2014 probably aren't going to update this time. It's not going to be beneficial for you to update. You're not going to get a higher yield. However, if you did not update in 2014, you could. It could be beneficial to you. So those are people that I think are possible candidates for a yield update.
Yeah, I think that online tool is going to be great for people to help make that decision too. So beyond those two options, there's also an Ark IC option, which I know you've said is probably going to be rare, but there are some very specific scenarios where that might trigger that decision. Ben,
Yep.
could you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned it's a revenue program. It's a revenue-based program that smooths revenue from periods of high farm income to low, just similar to the Ark County program, only in this case it's based on all the crops on your farm just for your FSA farm. So it is possible for producers to have multiple FSA farms. You can elect Ark IC for one FSA farm and then do PLC or Ark County for the other farms, right? So it is possible. It's just your FSA farm, not what we consider an ownership block, right? Okay, so just to help understand that. But there are cases where Ark IC makes sense. It wasn't popular in the last Farm Bill because it was a lot of work, and it was hard to see. There was very few scenarios where Ark IC was actually going to make payments, or even if it did trigger payments, they weren't near the level that the Ark County and PLC payments were.
And Ark IC only pays on 65% of your base acres compared to 85% of your base acres, which the other two pay on.
That is correct, yeah. There is a little bit of an adjustment factor there related to base acres in terms of what is able to be paid or what gets a payment of all your acres. However, we do think there are some scenarios as producers that you need to, where we think it's possible that a producer should consider or at least take a look and see if it's possible. One of those scenarios would be if you're a farm with 100% prevent plant. It is a revenue program, and so if you've got this historical benchmark of revenue and all of a sudden you have no crops in 2019, you have no revenue, and so you trigger the maximum payment possible if you're 100% prevent plant. However, if you planted, let's say, 5 acres, it is a percentage, or the calculation, the current year calculation is based on a weighted average of all your planted acres. So even though you might have 400 acres in your FSA farm and you only got 5 planted, in the eyes of the Farm Service Agency, they're going to look at that and say that whatever your revenue was on all those 5 acres is the revenue you got on all your acres.
Oh, wow.
And so, it is what is on your planted. So if you plant 1 acre, it is possible that you get kicked out of the system and Ark IC no longer makes sense for you. Yeah, if you're 100% prevent planted, you have no revenue for the year in the eyes of the Farm Service Agency, and so you can trigger the maximum payment.
But you're also tying in for 2020.
You're doing a 2-year decision in 2019 and 2020. However, if you're getting a maximum payment, it's probably likely that that's going to be more than Ark County and PLC over a 2-year period. Just know that you're probably giving up maybe potential revenue in 2020. So it becomes a cash management opportunity a little bit here. So that's the first thing. That's the first scenario when I think producers should consider. The second scenario where I think producers should consider Ark IC is if your individual years are drastically different than the county yields. If you've got yields that fluctuate a lot, and maybe it's river bottom ground that you've got a farm and it's in a river bottom, and maybe something happens to it and you lose your revenue. There is potential that Ark IC makes sense in that scenario because you've got such variable revenue due to that. And again, this is on FSA farms, so you could own 4 or 5 FSA farms and only claim it on one FSA farm versus the others. Another scenario, and I want to go back to what Mary said with the base acres, because this is, I think, sometimes confusing for people. So base acres are your historical representation. So if you have a farm of corn, 100 acres of corn, but you've historically planted soybeans on those acres, and in the eyes of the FSA, the Farm Service Agency, that's 100 acres of base acres of soybeans. You get your payment based on soybeans, not on corn. That's how Ark County, that's how the county-based option and the PLC option work. It's not what you plant, it's what your base acre identification is. In the Ark individual world, the payment is based on what you planted, but the payment still comes out on how many base acres you have. And Mary talked about earlier that the Ark IC program only pays on 65% of your base acres, whereas Ark County and PLC pay on 85% of your base acres. However, there are certain commodities that are exempt. And so for our farms that have a lot of fruit and vegetable production, if you have more than 15% of your fruit and vegetable production on your farm, or more than 15% of your acres are fruit and vegetable production, it makes sense to look at ARC-IC, because now all of a sudden those acres are getting exempt and you're going above that 85%, right? You're going below 85% of your base acres. And so therefore, that's a scenario where we think ARC-IC makes sense for producers as well. Any other questions about ARC-IC?
So what do you mean by they're exempt?
They're not a covered commodity. So there's certain commodities that are covered by the programs. In Ohio, our most common covered commodities are going to be corn, soybeans, wheat, and those are the commodities that get...
Fruit and vegetables aren't. So if you're in a place, and I tend to use northern Ohio and even southern Ohio, pumpkins would be another one that's not covered.
So, but are they getting paid on those acres then?
No.
I'm just trying to figure out what the 15%, how that...
So Ben's saying 15% because for our county and PLC, you're only being paid on 85% of your base acres anyhow. And if you have 15% or more of your base acres in fruit and vegetables, you wouldn't be paid on those.
You'd actually be below that 85, right?
Right.
You wouldn't get those, right? So an example would be 100 acres. Let's just take 100 acres, and I've got 30 acres of pumpkins, right, on my 100 acres, right? So therefore,
county and PLC, you're not going to be paid on.
Yeah, even though I've got base acres, I only get paid on 70% instead of 85%, because 30 acres of my 100 are planted to a non-covered commodity in that case. So it is kind of confusing, but it basically does create some more wiggle room, because ARC-IC is at 65, whereas ARC County and PLC are 85% of base acres. So it creates a little bit more wiggle room. Now this is obviously going to be a lot of our producers. A lot of our producers aren't going to have more than 15% of their acres in specialty crops, but they do exist in Ohio.
One thing we've been hearing is maybe a little more interest in the supplemental coverage option, SCO, and some people have already enrolled in that and you have to elect PLC. So I guess talk a little bit about what that SCO is, and if they've enrolled in it and they don't want to go with PLC, what their option is there.
Yeah. So you're right. To enroll in the supplemental coverage option, you have to be enrolled in PLC. One really quick distinction that I want to make is SCO is a crop insurance product. It's attached to your crop insurance. You pay a premium on it, but then it is also a product on top of your individual policies. So it's ran through your crop insurance agency. It comes through the risk management agency of USDA. ARC PLC and ARC individual are all farm service agency programs. They come from a government program that operates based on risk and fluctuation. The three programs that I just mentioned are all paid on base acres, your historical plantings, what you have identified on those acres. SCO is paid on what you planted. So therefore, you could make the case that SCO and crop insurance are both better risk management tools than the other three, the ARC County, the ARC Individual, and the PLC, from the standpoint that you're getting a payment within the year, right? You're going to get a payment at the end of the year. It's tied directly to what you planted. And it's more representative if you have a crop failure or something like that. So SCO is a valid risk management tool, and it's based on what you planted, not what your historical base acreage is in. You do have to enroll in PLC though. That is the catch. You have to be enrolled in PLC. Now you brought up 2019 from the standpoint that the 2019 crop year for crop insurance, the enrollment date was March 15th of 2019, so earlier this year. And producers could decide then if they wanted to be enrolled in SCO. At that point, if they enrolled in SCO, they were giving an intention to the risk management agency that they intended to do PLC later in the year, right? However, we're just now doing enrollment for PLC for 2019. And PLC and ARC County and ARC-IC enrollment will go through March 15th. And so it is possible that now our decisions have changed and producers are maybe saying, hey, we're actually not going to do PLC, we're going to do ARC County or ARC Individual, right?
Yeah.
Well, in the eyes of the risk management agency, that's a violation, right? You can't be enrolled in the ARC County program or the agricultural risk coverage programs and supplemental coverage option. So what they've decided is that instead of fining producers for misreporting acreage, they're going to exempt it in 2019. So if you were enrolled in SCO and now you want to do ARC County or ARC Individual for 2019, you are exempt. You basically can get a new filing. You don't have to pay the fee. However, going forward, those dates are all going to be the same thing. So it should be easy for producers because the enrollment date's always going to be March 15th for both farm programs with FSA and then crop insurance with your crop insurance agent. And so make sure that you're all doing it at the same time, and hopefully we won't have any violations, but just know that if you do enroll in ARC County or ARC IC with the Farm Service Agency and you do SCO with your crop insurance, eventually you will get a bill, a letter saying, hey, you're in violation for misreporting, and here's your fee. So just something to be aware of there. As far as what SCO actually is and when people should actually consider it, it is an area-based revenue coverage. So it offers potentially higher levels of insurance coverage at a cheaper cost. So it is possible that it's attractive to some people. The way I break it down, the way we look at it at Ohio State, is we break it down into two classifications of when people should maybe consider this option. The first classification is producers that have high levels of crop insurance coverage already to begin with. I define high levels of crop insurance coverage at 80 and 85%. Those are high. And for most people in the state of Ohio, 80% is the norm. 81% is our statewide average, and so, it's there, 81%. So if you're already at that high level of coverage, right, you can get a little bit more coverage for some additional cost. And so maybe it doesn't really make sense to do that, but if you wanted to lower your insurance coverage from like 80% down to 65% and then buy the rest with SCO, you can get a cheaper crop insurance bill and have some level of protection for what you did at a cheaper rate. Just know what you're doing. You're giving up an individual coverage option at 80%, and now you're taking a bigger chunk of an area-based insurance policy. And area-based insurance policies do not trigger as often because revenues don't fluctuate or yields don't fluctuate, because now you're talking about a county average yield or an area-based yield instead of your individual farm. So just know that if you're giving that up, you're giving up some variability and potentially some top-end protection. But it is a way to get cheaper insurance coverage for the same level of protection. So we actually think if producers have high levels of insurance coverage, that 80-85%, and they want to lower their crop insurance bill but still get that high level of coverage, that this is possible. Now the other scenario, real quick, I just want to mention that there's a second scenario here, and that's producers that I would consider to have low levels of crop insurance, right? Maybe they've got 60-65% of a revenue policy or a yield policy for crop insurance, right? They can get higher levels of coverage at a cheap cost, right? But I think in this case, it's important to ask the producer, do you even want higher levels of coverage? Maybe they're at 60-65 because that's what they're comfortable with. And if they're comfortable, why spend extra money, right? Because the SCO option would be extra money. Why spend extra money for higher levels of coverage if you don't want it? But if you're at 60-65% or even 55 or 50%, if you're at those levels because you don't want to pay the higher premiums for the higher level of coverage, this is an opportunity to get higher levels of area-based coverage at a cheap rate. And so I think those are possibilities. Both scenarios are very different, whether you're a high crop insurance user or a low crop insurance insurer. Very different scenarios, but I do think there is an appeal. Now, we get asked a lot, how does this fit into the, if let's be honest, farmers look at relative payments to make this decision. Which program is going to give me the most money? I mean, that's how they look at it. We encourage people to think about the best case scenario and when do you want cash and what do you want to protect from a risk management standpoint. But we always get asked, okay, which program is going to pay me the most? Well, if you're in PLC and you're getting cheaper coverage on crop insurance, or you're gaining money, right? You're getting a cheaper option for PLC. How does that figure in? I think they're two separate decisions, exactly what I talked about earlier in terms of, one program is based on base acres, one's based on planted acreage. The SCO seems to be a better risk, crop insurance seems to be a better fitting risk management plan, whereas the commodity programs are income support. So I look at them as two separate decisions, but in Ohio, it's going to amount to about $15 to $20 if you do PLC and then SCO and you take the cheaper crop insurance option. You're going to save about $20 an acre. So if you do that, that's a possibility of saving some money. Just know that what you're giving up is the potential for triggering higher payments if we have a crop disaster for your crop insurance. And then, as most people know here in 2019, and we learned well this year, is Prevent Plant does not pay on an area-based crop insurance policy. So if you have SCO, you're only going to get Prevent Plant on whatever your underlying crop insurance policy is, not the SCO portion of the policy. So.
Yeah, that's some good advice. So they really need to look at, if your farm's drastically different than the rest of the county, then it might not be a good option either. But if you're pretty similar, then you potentially if you have a bad year, then you're more likely to the rest of the county's having a bad year.
Yep. And we encourage people to talk and see how they're faring with the rest of the county.
Yeah.
It's easy to look at a crop year in the lens of what's out our back door. But there are places where, maybe a certain part of the county is worse than everybody else or better than everybody else. And so we encourage people to scout and talk with their neighbors and get a feeling of what's going on in the ground.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, this is a lot of information to just cover in a short podcast. So we do have a lot of meetings scheduled around the state.
101 right
Wow.
now. We'll see if that grows.
That's a lot of meetings.
But we've got 101 within a 3-month period. And Ohio State University Extension and the College of Ag has really worked hard to get this off the ground, and it wouldn't be possible without our educators in every county across the state. So,
yeah. So that website, Mary, that you mentioned,
It is go.osu.edu/farmbill2019, and it has a list of county meetings, and you can search all of those 101 county meetings to find one that's going to work with your schedule and that's close to home. So Ben and county extension educators will be there to go over this material in more detail and also to answer any other questions you might have and show you how to use that decision tool.
awesome.
we've also got webinars up there. So if you can't make a meeting or if it just doesn't fit in your time, you can watch the webinars online.
And just a reminder about MFP.
Oh, yes, excellent. So the market facilitation payments, also an FSA program. Those are those payments to help us alleviate trade damage. The deadline to sign up for those is December 6th at your local FSA office. As of this moment, 75% of the 2019 payments are going out the door. We're still waiting to see if the final 25 will get approved. But these are, we're looking at $66, anywhere between $60 and $88 a county, or an acre per county. It varies per county. You're taking 75% of those values, and we're looking at $55 right now per acre. So adds up. It's real money. It's there, and producers have the opportunity to get some. So thanks.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. This was a ton of great information, and check out that website. Don't forget to give the podcast a like on Facebook or Twitter, and we would love if you would give us 5 stars on Stitcher or iTunes, whichever platform you're listening on.
And I'm Ben Brown, OSU on Twitter.
Thanks, Ben.
We're going to go. Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.